Well, now to help us take a closer look at Theresa May's economic legacy, I'm joined by Kevin Matthews from George Mason University. So, obviously, Brexit clearly overshadowed Prime Minister May's time in office. What's your take on her biggest policy achievements?
Well, unfortunately, everything that Theresa May did while she was Prime Minister revolves around Brexit. You can't get away from it. She leaves the UK economy with a surprisingly low unemployment rate, lowest since the mid-1970s. On the other hand, productivity is itself very low, stubbornly low. And at the same time, because of Brexit, it's estimated that the UK economy has contracted by 2%, and that's before Brexit has even gone through. The real indicator of where things are headed is probably the pound. If you take a look at the value of the pound sterling compared to other currencies, it's dropped by 15% since Brexit. And her successor is going to have to face that. And it's not going to help the economy one bit.
Now, we know that she did actually have a number of legacy policies in the works. She had a multi-billion pound cash injection for British schools, action on parental leave, mental health technology investment. What happens to those now?
Well, it is probable that Boris Johnson will have to give them the back of his hand, because to become Prime Minister, he's made all sorts of promises himself, namely massive tax cuts for the wealthy. And this is on the back of a decade of austerity. And the indications are that if there's any fallout from Brexit, the people who are going to suffer the most are going to be the poor and those who need help. The very people that May promised when she presented those promises in the 2017 election.
Now, as we know, a lot of people are saying, look, she had one job, and that was to deliver Brexit, and she failed. Is that a fair assessment, and is that true?
Yes, and it's just the short answer. It's true that she failed. It's true that was her only real job. It's easy to feel some sympathy for Theresa May, but no one forced her to assume the premiership. She wanted the job. She took it. She could have reached out to the opposition when she took the job. She didn't. She decided, like too many conservative politicians, and I have to say the same is true in this country, that they put party before country. And she was more concerned about keeping the Conservative Party together. And so instead of having a broad approach to Brexit, she decided to appeal to the hard core of her party. And they have always demanded a clean break, or as big a break from the EU as possible. What she didn't take into account was that there was no decisive victory in the Brexit vote 3 years ago. It was fairly close. It was 52% to 48%. And instead of reaching out to the country, instead of having a conversation about what Brexit really meant, she decided that she would close herself off with a small group of advisors. She would come out with platitudes like Brexit means Brexit, which didn't tell anybody anything. And so when her deal was finally announced, it satisfied no one.
And you're tapping into something important there. So let's look at the structural economic issues that really gave rise to a lot of grievances that led people to feel left out, alienated, which in part we saw actually played out with Brexit. Talk about how any of those problems were actually addressed under her leadership.
Well, they weren't really, because everything that the government did under her was consumed by Brexit one way or another. And that's why issues such as what's going on with Iran right now have gotten overlooked until they become crises. She didn't address the fact that the British economy took a terrible hit by the 2008 recession. And her predecessor, David Cameron, pursued a policy of austerity. And that policy was carried out on the backs of the poor, on the working class, and they frankly were fed up with being treated, or mistreated, I guess is a better way of putting it, by what they saw as the forces of globalization. And so when the Brexit vote came, they took it out on the EU.
And obviously we know that former Prime Minister David Cameron was the one who initially called the Brexit referendum, resigned when it didn't go his way. Theresa May came in, now she's resigned, and now we have Boris Johnson preparing to take the helm. What should we be watching for in this 100 days to deliver Brexit scenario?
Well, he's made conflicting promises to too many people. He says that he's going to carry out Brexit, do or die, to use his words, by the 31st of October, even if that means crashing out of the EU without a deal. The problem with that is that it raises a whole host of problems. most specifically with the island of Ireland, where there would be a hard border, and that brings about the possibility of a renewal of the Troubles that nobody's talking about. With this country, with the United States, the hope is that they will get a trade deal with the United States, but that could take years to negotiate. And they have to be aware of the fact that on their own, they're never going to get the same kind of treatment that they would as part of the EU. And then finally, there's the dealing with the EU itself. If they crash out of the EU, then that will create a great amount of bad blood between Brussels, the rest of Europe, and London, and any hopes for any amicable post-Brexit world, I think, are nil.
Certainly a lot to keep an eye on. Thank you so much for breaking all that down. Kevin Matthews there of George Mason University.